This chubby young girl had barely arrived at the manor for her very first day as a maid when she was suddenly targeted and humiliated by the noble young lady of the house.
Wo ist meine Brosche?
Anka looked completely helpless, because it was only her first day working there, and she had never even seen the so-called brooch before. But the young lady stared at her with suspicion, convinced that Anka had stolen it, and even threatened to send her to the police station. Desperate to prove her innocence, the girl immediately stretched out her hands and let the young lady inspect them, but the noble girl still refused to let it go, and even demanded that Anka remove her apron.
Wyslice.
Poor Anka was only a countryside girl who had never faced such humiliation before, so she could only take off her clothes and endure it in silence.
Hier ist sie. Was stellst du hier noch? Verschwinde.
After leaving the room, Anka curled up alone in a dark corner, tears quietly streaming down her face in grief. In fact, just 2 weeks earlier, Anka had still been an innocent young girl living quietly with her recently widowed mother, but her mother moved on shockingly fast, because not long after her father passed away, she had already become involved with another man from the same village.
Ty si ten Nevin bastard? Povedz mame, že budú ohlášky.
When Anka returned home and discovered this, she became furious, believing that she alone had worked hard to support the family, and that they did not need another man in the house. But her mother did not care about Anka's feelings at all, and even prepared sleeping clothes in advance for the man who was about to move in. Sure enough, only a few days later, her mother married that man. Meanwhile, Anka could only stand in the woodshed and watch everything unfold with anger burning inside her heart. No one could understand how the girl felt, and no one could predict what kind of days were waiting for her ahead. The wedding night itself became incredibly awkward, because the new husband had moved into their home and even brought along his 2 young children, forcing all 4 of them to squeeze into a single room to sleep. The selfish mother never once considered the feelings of the children, leaving Anka unable to fall asleep that entire night. The next morning, while her stepfather was shaving, Anka merely closed the door a little too loudly and was instantly met with his furious yelling. Even her own mother stood beside him and agreed with his scolding. But things did not stop there, because shortly afterward, the stepfather informed Anka that a noblewoman in the city was hiring maids, without even asking for her permission. He had secretly signed her up already. When Anka turned toward her mother with disbelief in her eyes, her mother's expression remained completely calm. At that moment, the girl instantly realized that the 2 of them had planned this together all along. After dedicating herself to this family for so long, she received no understanding from anyone, and not even her own mother cared about her feelings. In anger, Anka threw down the clothes she had not finished washing and slammed the door as she stormed out. No matter how hard she tried, the girl could not understand what she had done wrong. It was one thing for her stepfather to reject her, but did even her own mother think she was unnecessary now? After spending some time alone in sadness, Anka finally came to a realization. Instead of continuing to suffer in that house, it would be better for her to leave as soon as possible. And so, the girl left behind the hometown where she had lived for 15 years and climbed onto a carriage bound for a completely unfamiliar world. After 2 days of travel, she finally arrived in Prague, the largest city in the Czech lands. That evening, a gentle rain fell over the city, and the person who welcomed her was a maid supervisor named Liza. The supervisor then brought Anka before the lady of the house.
No je mi dlgy, Nivge. Jsi štum? Musíš poslouchat. Za krádež vyhazov. Rozumíš mi?
Jak naprav.
The mistress appeared kind and gentle, but the eldest daughter beside her was clearly a completely different story. The spoiled girl had been pampered since childhood, and even the way she ate cake revealed her careless and arrogant nature. No one knew what kind of fate awaited Anka after falling into her hands. Later, Anka followed the supervisor into a dark bedroom and hung the 2 photographs she carried onto the wall. Perhaps those photos were the only emotional connection she had left. The next day, her new life officially began, and under the careful guidance of the supervisor, Anka quickly adapted to the work there. For the first time, she also stepped outside and witnessed the prosperity of the magnificent city, slowly falling in love with it. But she never expected that when the supervisor brought her to clean the young lady's bedroom, the spoiled and unreasonable girl would humiliate her without mercy. The small spark of hope that had just appeared in Anka's heart instantly shattered into nothing. Yet this was only the beginning of fate playing cruel games with her life. The following morning, the noble family gathered together for breakfast. As the eldest daughter, Resi was constantly criticized by her mother, who complained that she behaved nothing like a proper lady and could not even manage the most basic table manners. In the eyes of her family, Resi never seemed to do anything correctly. They even ordered servants to bring over 2 books and place them under the girl's arms so that she would appear more elegant and refined. But the more those so-called rules tried to restrain her, the more rebellious Resi became. Unable to vent her frustration elsewhere, she began taking out her anger on Anka for no reason at all, forcing the poor girl to silently endure the constant bullying. During this time, Anka unexpectedly realized that this family was far more complicated than it appeared on the surface. Whenever the female supervisor helped the master look for something, she always stood unusually close to him.
Ja nie zbadam Kenię, czy potrzebują. Wszystko im sprawiam, co im na oczach widzi.
Every sign pointed to the fact that the relationship between the supervisor and the master was far from ordinary, but Anka was not concerned about any of that, because all she cared about was how to stop the young lady from continuing to torment her. Sure enough, the very next day, while Resi was using the toilet in her room, Anka discovered the bedsheets had been badly stained. Those kinds of stains were incredibly difficult to clean, and it was obvious that the young lady had done it deliberately once again. Meanwhile, Resi revealed a smug and satisfied smile, but the one who truly suffered was Anka, because as the young lady's personal maid, she had no choice but to wash those disgusting bedsheets clean. Reality quickly proved that even scrubbing until her hands were raw made no difference at all. Not until midnight did an older maid finally take pity on her, pulling a lemon from the cabinet, slicing it open, and placing a piece into Anka's exhausted hands. She sincerely told the girl that if she wanted to survive in this manner, she had to learn the habits and expectations of the masters who lived there. At only 15 years old, could Anka really find a way to survive within these harsh rules and customs? Soon the first light of dawn began to appear, and Anka had already spent the entire night washing a single ruined bedsheet. At the same time, the gardener in the distance also began his morning work. However, the man clearly seemed interested in Anka, slowly stopping what he was doing and walking toward her. The gardener had long been attracted to the new servant girl and constantly looked for chances to take advantage of her. But although Anka was inexperienced, she was not the kind of girl who would casually give herself away. Before long, the sound of a bell echoed through the manor, because an important group of guests would be arriving that day. Soon afterward, a handsome young man entered the room alongside his parents and casually handed his hat to Anka. The moment instantly caused the girl to glance back at him several times. But in truth, that family could hardly even be called nobility, because the young man was merely the son of a retired postman who wished to court the family's only daughter. No matter how anyone looked at it, the match seemed completely unequal in status. While the mistress continued complaining non-stop, the master of the manor silenced her with a single slap on the table, forcing her to calm down and politely welcome the guests instead. Even so, the mistress still looked extremely dissatisfied as she stared at her husband's expression. Soon afterward, the elegantly dressed young lady finally appeared. Although Resi was usually spoiled and unreasonable, she still had to restrain herself during such an occasion. Her father showed no mercy either, directly ordering his daughter to play a song in order to ease the tense atmosphere. But during all those years of lessons, Resi had wasted most of her time, and before long, she embarrassed herself in front of everyone. Yet to everyone's surprise, the invited young man suddenly sat beside Resi and calmly began playing a beautiful melody on the piano, instantly earning the admiration of everyone present. Not only did it ease Resi's awkward humiliation, but even the lord of the manor walked behind the young man and rested a hand on his shoulder, clearly impressed by his talent, which finally brought a hint of satisfaction to the mistress as well. By noon, in preparation for performing gracefully at the evening ball, Resi began trying on dresses with the assistance of her mother, but because she had grown used to freedom and always wore loose clothing, she struggled terribly with the tight corset underneath. With no other solution left, the mistress could only rely on the strong-built Anka to help tighten it. Without hesitation, Anka pressed her knee firmly against Resi's lower back, and after repeated struggling, finally managed to tighten the corset strings completely. When night arrived, nobles gathered together inside the manor, and the young lady danced elegantly with her fiancé while wearing a beautiful gown. Standing nearby, Anka watched them with obvious envy in her eyes. However, while the girl went into the kitchen to fetch desserts, she unexpectedly discovered Supervisor Liza secretly inhaling the scent of the Lord's coat. It became painfully obvious that this middle-aged woman truly harbored romantic feelings for the old master. After the lively ball finally ended, several maids gathered in the kitchen chatting together. At that moment, Liza was completely immersed in a fairy tale called The Governor Falls in Love with a Maid, only for another older woman to snatch the book away and throw it directly into the stove. She warned Liza to stop dreaming about fairy tales, because those stories were nothing more than unrealistic fantasies, but Liza seemed completely obsessed. firmly believing that one day she would become the heroine of such a story herself. Meanwhile, while no one else was around, Anka quietly danced alone in the hallway. Although she was merely a humble maid, she was still a young girl in the most beautiful years of her youth. So how could she not long for wonderful things in life? Unfortunately, the young lady happened to walk downstairs and discover her at that exact moment. At that moment, the young mistress revealed a surprisingly gentle side of herself and reached out her hand first, and in the silent hallway, the two of them slowly began to dance together. Perhaps at that very moment, the distance between them finally disappeared, and the two girls truly became friends who could share anything with each other. The next morning, Anka accidentally discovered that the young man was proposing to Resi. From their conversation, it seemed that Resi had accepted his proposal, but strangely enough, instead of feeling happy, Anka suddenly appeared deeply disappointed. So while brushing the young lady's hair, she deliberately asked where Resi planned to live after marriage and whether she truly loved that young man. Resi paused for a moment, avoiding a direct answer, and instead began asking Anka several deeply personal questions.
Už jsi to dělala? S chlapem?
That evening, while Anka was preparing desserts in the kitchen, the young lady once again came searching for her, unable to hide the emotions on her face.
Co se mnou bude Gustav zítra dělat?
How could Anka possibly understand such things when she was still an innocent young girl herself? But before leaving, Resi told her to find a way to personally experience romance and intimacy. The gardener had admired Anka for a long time and seemed like a decent enough man, so perhaps he could become the perfect person for that experience. Sure enough, deep into the quiet night, Anka secretly walked downstairs and calmly opened a door that had never been locked. When the girl fearlessly woke the gardener from his sleep, the man was completely stunned. As for what happened afterward, everything unfolded naturally. Meanwhile, as dawn slowly approached, Resi remained anxiously waiting alone. At last, Anka returned to the young lady's bedroom and shared her personal experience with her.
Dá sa to vydržať.
Opravdu.
Raz, dva aj potom.
Ukaž.
Such an unbelievable request left Anka struggling to fully accept what was happening. Yet under those unusual circumstances, the two girls truly formed a relationship that was both intimate and deeply unequal at the same time. Perhaps it all stemmed from Resi living under her family's control for far too long, because otherwise it was impossible to explain such complicated emotions. Soon the next day arrived. Winter was approaching, and light snow began drifting down from the sky. With the blessings of both families, Resi and her lover successfully completed their wedding ceremony. Meanwhile, on that very same day, the newlyweds climbed into a carriage and departed for the seaside, beginning a honeymoon that would last for 3 entire months. After losing the young mistress for those long months, Anka felt unbearably lonely, like an empty shell that had lost its soul, drifting through every day trapped in fantasy and longing. Meanwhile, life inside the manor continued as usual, and the maid supervisor still secretly maintained her intimate relationship with the master of the house. Even though the others were fully aware of what was happening, no one dared to speak about it openly. Just like that, 3 months passed in the blink of an eye, and the young mistress finally returned safely to the manor with her husband. But what worried the lady of the house was the fact that Resi showed no signs of pregnancy, which gradually made the mother anxious. As a result, the mistress ordered the maids to prepare herbal medicine for Resi to drink every single day until she became pregnant. There truly was a craftsman inside the manor who possessed some medical knowledge.
Tohle je dnes. Nalej to do vody, v tom sedí aspoň půl hodiny a naroste dítě.
Among everyone there, only the maid Anka remained clear-minded, believing that such methods were nothing more than self-deception. Yet she still had no choice but to follow the family doctor's instructions. Soon afterward, Anka poured the herbs into the bathtub while the young mistress beside her sat there filled with sorrow, even venting the frustration in her heart onto the maid. But after both of them released their pain and frustration, they tightly embraced each other and burst into tears. In truth, both of their lives had always been controlled by their parents. Maid Anka had been cruelly abandoned by her mother and stepfather, and although Resi was born into nobility, she had never once been allowed to truly live as herself. It was as if the two women had finally found a shared understanding through their suffering, gradually developing a deeper emotional connection born from feeling truly understood for the very first time. After some more time passed, the family gathered together for a meal when the son-in-law suddenly announced wonderful news. Resi was finally pregnant. The unexpected news made the lord of the manor incredibly happy. No one knew whether the herbal medicine had truly worked miracles or whether Resi had never had any problem to begin with. Either way, the burden weighing on everyone's hearts was finally lifted, allowing the whole family to breathe in relief. Even Anka standing nearby could not help feeling genuinely happy for her. But the good news did not stop there. As the First World War approached, a letter arrived at the manor encouraging young men to join the military and serve their country. Naturally, the wealthy son-in-law was no exception. Compared to the husband's excitement about going off to serve the nation, the atmosphere between mistress and maid inside the house felt even more joyful, because this meant Resi could finally escape from her husband's presence, while Anka could peacefully remain by the young mistress's side. As time slowly passed, several months later, Resi finally showed signs that she was about to give birth. After enduring wave after wave of painful struggle, large amounts of fluid spread across the floor. The family doctor quickly guided Resi back onto the bed and prepared for the difficult delivery ahead. But fate had other plans, because even by midnight, the child still had not been born, and it became obvious that something had gone terribly wrong. The only thing Anka could do was remain beside the bed, praying desperately for the young mistress. Soon the next morning arrived, and despite everyone struggling through the entire night, nothing had improved. In that era, not only could the baby be lost during childbirth, but even the mother herself could die. The family doctor later informed the mistress that the situation looked extremely grim, even warning her to quickly summon a priest and prepare for the worst. Those words were overheard by Anka from inside the room. The bond between the two women had become unbreakable, so how could she possibly watch Resi die like this? Anka constantly encouraged Resi, but her encouragement was not an order, nor obedience. It was a sincere and equal connection between two souls sharing the same pain. At that moment, she was no longer merely a maid. She became a companion, a witness, and a protector, and Resi was no longer the noble mistress of the manor. She was simply a fragile woman rediscovering what it meant to be loved while standing at the edge of life and death. In that moment, Anka became the only support holding Resi together in her fight against death itself. The child was finally born. The suffocating tension and pain that had consumed Anka at last found release in that single moment. But surprisingly, although the baby survived safely, neither the mother nor the lord of the manor appeared particularly happy, because Resi had given birth to a daughter. After all, the child would never inherit the family name, so why did everyone still look disappointed? Because within the aristocratic society of the late Austro-Hungarian Empire, patriarchy ruled everything, and in that very moment, the warmth within the family completely disappeared. It also made the audience understand even more clearly why Resi needed Anka so deeply, and why the dependence between the two women had grown so intense. Being allowed to act as the child's caretaker filled Anka's heart with happiness, but for some unknown reason, the baby girl cried constantly from the moment she was born, and no matter how Anka tried comforting her, nothing worked. The child cried endlessly while outside in the streets, and even inside the living room during bedtime she refused to calm down. Over time, this left Resi, as the mother, feeling increasingly depressed and exhausted. Fortunately, Anka patiently comforted her from the side, helping the young mistress slowly relax emotionally. But Resi knew very well that her husband did not want a daughter, and she herself had never truly loved him either. Deep down, she even wished he would never return home again. Anka took Resi's wish seriously, so she went to seek out the family doctor, who was rumored not only to possess excellent medical skills but also some knowledge of mysterious rituals. At first, the doctor refused to help her, because going against natural morality in such a way felt deeply wrong. But after carefully listening to everything Anka revealed about the young mistress's suffering, the doctor seemed moved with sympathy and eventually shared several methods with her. Whether they would truly work or not, no one could say. And so, whenever the two women found themselves alone together, they secretly followed the doctor's instructions inside the room, whispering curses and praying for Resi's husband to die on the battlefield and never return home again. Meanwhile, in the days that followed, the gardener who had gone off to war returned to the manor once. The only reason he came back was to see Anka, the woman he had always deeply loved, because he did not want to leave this world with regrets. Although the two of them had shared only a single night together, this man truly held a special place in Anka's heart. Compared to the emotional dependence she shared with the young mistress, Anka had genuinely fallen in love with the gardener. Before leaving once again, the man handed her a photograph so she would have something to remember him by if they never met again. Afterward, the girl hung the gardener's photograph on the wall beside the pictures of her parents. That alone showed just how important he had become to her. As the war dragged on, time slowly passed, and before long, another 2 years went by. Then the arrival of one person shattered the silence of the manor once again. The woman could hardly believe her eyes, because her husband had finally returned home after 3 years at war. But the situation was clearly far from hopeful. The man came back leaning on a cane, and even worse, he had lost one of his eyes. The once proud son-in-law who had married into the family had now become a broken man, leaving his wife unsure of what to do. Even the atmosphere within the manor had become cold and lifeless. The family that had once been extremely satisfied with this son-in-law now treated him with complete indifference.
Kannst du das nicht zudecken?
Jetzt kann ich wirklich nur ein Auge auf dich.
The husband's emotional outbursts even frightened his own daughter into tears outside the room. What should have been a lively family lunch instead turned painfully awkward. The old lord, who had once admired his son-in-law greatly, could now only sit there speechless as he watched the man's miserable condition. After lunch ended, the husband and wife began arguing fiercely inside the room. No one knew what emotions filled the father's heart now that he realized he had controlled his daughter's fate all along.
Что брачишь, баба? Меня не мое дитя.
The man disliked girls so much that he could not even love his own daughter. Could such a person still be called a real man? Meanwhile, the maid Liza noticed that the lord of the manor was in a terrible mood, so she deliberately tried comforting the old man in her own way.
That's right.
Ik ben eer gutes Mädel.
But Liza was far too naive. To the lord, she was nothing more than a tool, and he could never offer her the future she dreamed of. In the end, with the secret assistance of the family doctor, she quietly got rid of the child she had conceived with the lord. That devastating moment completely shattered Liza emotionally. Only then did she realize that the fairy tale called The Governor Falls in Love with a Maid had been nothing but a lie from the very beginning. But the tragedy did not stop there. The next morning, while Anka was hanging clothes out to dry on the balcony, she noticed a stool lying overturned near the doorway. The moment she pulled open the curtain, the heartbreaking scene before her instantly reduced her to tears. Her dear friend Liza had taken her own life. Once again, reality proved that a servant of low status meant absolutely nothing in the eyes of the nobility. Liza had chosen to end her life after being crushed by humiliation and hopelessness. Even worse, the manor publicly announced in the newspaper that Maid Liza had died by suicide because she could not bear the weight of her sins, and therefore she would never enter heaven. What a cruel and hypocritical era it truly was. The death of her friend exposed the brutal reality of how servant women were used and discarded, while also foreshadowing the danger waiting in Anka's own future. This was never merely a tragic love story, it was the inevitable destruction of silenced women trapped beneath class oppression and social control. As time went on, the manor became quieter and emptier than ever before. The once glamorous and lively atmosphere had completely vanished. The son-in-law spent his days drowning himself in alcohol, often collapsing unconscious onto the floor of the living room. Meanwhile, the lord constantly fought with his wife, and their marriage had already reached the edge of collapse. But the most important change of all was that the Austro-Hungarian Empire had lost the First World War. The nation's territory was about to be divided by foreign powers, signaling that this aristocratic family itself was becoming part of history. One after another, the servants chose to leave and seek their own futures elsewhere. At that very moment, Anka unexpectedly received a letter from her hometown. It was the first letter her mother had sent in 5 years, instantly filling the girl with overwhelming emotion. Without hesitation, Anka rushed into the young mistress's bedroom and invited her to leave this decaying household behind and return to the countryside together. After all, the bond between them had already become deeper than ordinary love.
Ja nemám peníze.
Já jich zarobím. Budeme si nažívat. Len mi 2 malé slečna, uvidíš. Noci. O jednej.
Anka was the kind of girl who valued loyalty and affection above everything else, and she could never abandon Resi alone. But reality proved far more difficult than she imagined. That night, Anka stood on a snowy street corner holding her luggage, waiting for a very long time. Yet Resi never appeared. as snowflakes slowly drifted down from the sky. The loneliness and coldness of that moment pierced straight through the girl's heart. By the following morning, after waiting outside all night, Resi still failed to arrive as promised. Had something happened inside the manor? Or did she simply no longer wish to leave with Anka at all? Determined to learn the truth, Anka finally decided to return to the manor one last time, but the moment she opened the door, she discovered everyone gathered together under the Lord's arrangement, discussing where each person would go next. When it came time to ask Anka where she planned to go, her answer was simple: "I'm going home, if you allow it. I would like to take the young mistress with me." Resi's husband agreed to let Anka take their daughter away and even promised to send money to support them every month. Although Resi ultimately accepted allowing Anka to leave with the child, one question still remained painfully real. Why did she suddenly change her mind after originally agreeing to leave together with Anka? I believe the answer lies in the way class consciousness had been deeply rooted inside her. Although Resi and Anka shared unwavering feelings for each other, deep down, Resi was still a noblewoman raised within aristocratic society. Since childhood, she had been taught to obey authority, preserve appearances, and never break the rules imposed by family and society. The moment she truly faced the reality of running away, she finally understood what it would cost her. She would lose her social status, her security, and face rejection from society itself. In the end, she simply lacked the courage to take that final step. This created a powerful contrast between Resi's fear and Anka's bravery. Anka came from the lower class, yet she possessed far greater courage and a stronger ability to face the uncertainty of life. Perhaps the film was using this contrast to reveal a deeper irony. Freedom is not something granted by birth. It only comes through awakening. Resi's betrayal of their promise perfectly proved that she could never become truly free like Anka. Meanwhile, during the carriage ride toward the countryside, Anka discovered a newspaper while stopping along the way. The photograph printed inside belonged to the gardener who had once loved her so deeply. Sadly, the man had died on the battlefield, and with that heartbreaking revelation, the film finally came to an end. The chambermaid uses the aristocratic manor of the late Austro-Hungarian Empire as a mirror to expose the devastating survival struggles faced by women trapped beneath both class oppression and patriarchal control. Anka is a lower-class maid abandoned by her family, while Resi is a noblewoman imprisoned by aristocratic expectations and tradition. Within a relationship shaped by unequal power, the two women gradually develop an intense emotional dependence that tightly intertwines their destinies. Through delicate storytelling, the film reveals how women's bodies were controlled, disciplined, and objectified under patriarchal society. Anka is forced to strip herself in order to prove her innocence, while Resi is trapped inside painful corsets and reduced to a tool for childbirth. Meanwhile, the tragedy of Maid Liza completely destroys the fantasy of the governor falls in love with a maid, exposing the cruel reality of class divisions. The film's most powerful message lies in its destruction of false freedom. In the end, Resi betrays her promise with Anka because the mark of class hierarchy had already become deeply embedded within her soul. Meanwhile, Anka returns to her hometown carrying the photograph of the love she lost, finally transforming from a passive victim of fate into someone who has awakened and chosen her own path. The destinies of these two women together become the film's sharpest accusation against the cruelty of the old world.